Hello, welcome to another episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Ryan, how are you today?
I am doing great. How are you?
I'm really good. Now we got Glenn Longabaugh in the studio
Glenn's
with us again.
in the room.
Very good. We've got him with his farmer. He's going to have his farmer hat on, metaphorically,
Okay.
with us today. But first, as always, Glenn, the question of the day. And this ought to be good. If your pet could talk, what would it say?
Yeah. I know exactly what she's thinking all the time. Feed me. Are we going to the kitchen? Are we going to the kitchen? What's in the refrigerator? What's in the drawer? Right? That's all she's thinking about 24/7.
And what is this pet?
It's a big fat black lab who is worthless for any kind of duck chasing or anything useful. She's absolutely worthless.
She stays in the house.
Yeah, she's pretty good about cleaning stuff up off the floor.
Sure.
Right?
That would eliminate the need to chase a duck.
That's right.
So feed me would be the thing your pet would say.
That's all she's thinking about.
That's hilarious.
24/7.
Treats.
Yep.
Great.
Ryan?
Okay, so we have stray cats is what we have in the house.
In the house?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, stray cats. So I talk to them. You know, I do talk to them when I'm walking through the house, and my wife makes fun of me. She says
Wait a second.
They can't
How
talk
does that
to you.
go?
What do you mean?
What do you say to them?
Well, you just tell them to move, or you tell them to get up here, or whatever. You just talk to them. You don't have a conversation with them necessarily, but if they could talk, and knowing one of them was rescued off the porch when it was like 4 degrees one night, a couple 3 years ago.
Off your porch or somebody else's?
No, ours.
Okay.
No, ours. I don't go take other people's cats. A lot of times well, they're always somebody else's cats. The fact that people buy cats with as many
just crazy?
free cats as there are. Yeah. So, but anyway, I've always kind of envisioned that it would sort of be like an episode of MTV Cribs for these stray cats. They'd be like, I was destitute for a while, and then look at this.
Look at me now.
Look at this. I have this whole couch. I got that whole bed in there. So I don't know what they'd say necessarily, but I would hope they'd be grateful.
How many you got in there?
Well, there's 3 that are in there all the time, and one that she sort of just passes back and forth at her own accord. So. But I'm a softie for stray animals. I really am. And that's all they kind of have to do is show up at an inopportune weather event. Come on in. So Carla is not happy with me, and that's all they'll ever be, because one more than I'm the first. I make the room for the next one. It's my absence that will make room for the next one.
So Ryan, I've got a question for you. Do your cats appear to be grateful?
Never.
That's what.
No, they could care less.
I saw a meme one time. It was a dog's diary versus a cat's diary, and the dog's diary was, "We're going for a walk. My favorite thing. My favorite thing. We're going to get a treat. My favorite thing. My favorite thing. Right? It's rubbing my belly. My favorite thing. My favorite thing." Cat's log. Day 463 of my captivity.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. You don't want to let that door open very long, or they'd all be gone. No, they probably went back in, but they would be like, no. So, anyway, so I was raised with them. That's my mom had them. So.
Oh, we've got a house dog. It's a big lab. It's a silver lab, a silver lab is just like a black lab or a chocolate lab or yellow lab, except it costs about 3 times as much when you buy one. And looks like a chocolate lab, kind of. But anyway, it would probably say...
and it's a silver. I've never even heard of that.
Yep. It's got kind of a different skin hair color, I guess. But anyway, it would probably say this place is nuts, because I never had a house pet until they talked me into moving this one inside, and they've kept it clean, and they've kept the house vacuumed, and so I haven't had anything to protest about, but he'd probably just say this place is crazy.
Yeah.
It's just always going and coming and in and out and in the kennel, and it's always in the kennel when we're gone. But
how big is it?
120 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
It is a big dog.
Well, I've had labs before, but they were all outside, and they were like bulls in china shops. I can't imagine one in the house.
Oh, the tail. It just comes through, and we can't have anything on that's coffee table height, right? And it it goes down the hall, and it's like, bang, that tail just hits the wall.
Oh, my.
So that's all I got for what my pet would say.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Kick him off.
Well, Glenn, you got your farmer hat on today.
I do.
Not your agronomist hat, although you may have to go back and forth a little bit. But we had a grower was asking us about just kind of talk about the economics of farming. I mean, we go through a lot of things about the agronomics of farming,
Sure.
but a lot of the listeners may not be familiar with some of the things that impact a grower. What do you call it? Gives you the vapors, right? You get you kind of hit the panic button, or what are those things that a grower thinks about, like with the commodity prices and input cost and cash rent, the things that are on a grower's mind from an economic standpoint. And I've seen you kind of broke it down field by field, which can get kind of disheartening.
Sure.
You've broken it down as an enterprise.
Right.
But from a grower's mindset, I guess what's going through their heads as far as the economics of farming, and then kind of walk us through that flow of how the risk and reward
Sure.
of farming.
Yeah.
It's not as glamorous as everyone thinks.
As he makes it look.
Do I make it look glamorous?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the year, most times we have black ink, and because of increased production. So you think about the last 20 years, we really have only had a couple of years that I thought were, crazy stressful, right? Where you had the opportunity to really lose any significant amount of money, right? For most of those years, we've had, as long as you didn't live like a drunken sailor, we had opportunity to make money in those last 20 years. You think about 2012. 2012 was a year where
Explain that in depth, because we talk about that a lot. 12 comes up almost in conversations and even on the podcast.
Yeah, so in 2012, we didn't just have drought; we had biblical drought, right? And we had cornfields where corn is our largest investment crop, right? So we spend a lot more. Yeah, you guys are gonna have to. I'm not a professional.
We are.
Yeah, you are.
You should see the camera's on Glenn, but Ryan and I are both moving the cameras up and closer.
Yeah,
And to be
He's ready to go.
fair,
And he says he's not a professional. He's been on 50% of the episode.
yes. Glenn, we pulled him out of the doctor's office. Basically, he's going to leave here and go get some antibiotics because he's not feeling well. But.
Yeah, that is all true.
So back to 2012.
Yeah, so you were asking me about 2012, and you got me rubbing my forehead. That's my tell. If we're playing cards and I'm bluffing, and you see me rubbing my forehead, you know that I'm bluffing. So that's my stress sign.
Poor Glenn sliding out of his chair.
Yeah, so I
we're like
I can't get any closer to this microphone.
There you go. Nah, you're fine now.
What I'm not going to give it some kind of bug, right? For the subsequent.
Next one's virtual, so he's fine.
Oh, that's good.
He'll be West Lafayette.
Outstanding. So yeah, we talk a lot about 2012 because 2012 was just biblical drought, right? And some perspective on that would be we had a lot of fields that only got harvested just to satisfy the crop insurance that there was nothing there, right?
Just to prove that there was nothing. You could look at it, but they just still had to run through the field.
That's right. And a lot of times what we ran in the combine in 2012, because when you have those really suboptimal conditions, really dry conditions, what happens, Ryan, is that you'll have these mycotoxins, you'll have these organisms like Aspergillus flavus set up for housekeeping, which is a ear rot. And the corn that we did harvest wasn't worth anything, right? So a lot of times we were making recommendations, hey, just close your machine up, run through the corn, try to run as much of that out of the back as you can, all that really light, loose, fluffy stuff that was covered with mycelium, because really it was unsellable anyway, right? So it was not uncommon in 2012. The really, really good ground that has good moisture holding capacity was still making, 100, 120 bushel. But a lot of the common hill ground was less than 20 bushel the acre, right? Really, really low
So the
levels.
best ground was making less than half what it would normally make.
That's correct. And yet, one of the things that's changed is the safety net, and I'm talking about the federal crop insurance program. That really kicked in a big way in 2012. In fact, the thing that I was worried about and what other growers were thinking about was, is there a large enough pool of money to offset when you have this kind of this kind of drought, right?
It was widespread.
It was widespread. It wasn't just southwestern Indiana or southern Indiana or, the eastern Midwest. It was all the way across the country. And what happens on a year like that, when you're that low on production, is then the price kicks in. And of course, on crop insurance, it's revenue assurance. They're not just guaranteeing this many bushels. They're guaranteeing this many bushels at whatever the price is, either during the spring. I say spring, it's a February time frame, and it's the December futures through February, or the December futures through October, right? So you price it on the monthly average of those 2 months. Well, by the time we got to October, corn was, in excess of $7, $8 a bushel, right? Depending on the locality. And so those that had a crop were really flush, and those that didn't have a crop, your crop insurance guarantee was based off of this higher price. And so 2012 ended up being a really good year for a lot of growers, as long as they had crop insurance. If they didn't have crop insurance, then it was an absolute disaster.
They were doomed.
Yeah, it was a disaster, right? One of the reasons why it worked out pretty well too was we had this biblical drought from the very get-go, right? We had guys planting corn. There were some guys that were done planting corn by the initial planting date in 2012, right? So normally you shouldn't even plant corn for insurance purposes until like the 6th of April. We had guys that were done planting corn by the end of March, right? Because it was such a dry, warm spring. Accumulated GDDs really, really quickly. And by the time we got into mid-May, it was obvious that we had a problem. And that corn should have actually started flowering in the first part of June. And yet it still didn't flower until the middle of July, right? So corn, which should not go dormant, right? It's believed physiologically that corn doesn't go dormant, definitely did go dormant in 2012, right? And so... it was pretty obvious we were going to have problems. Now, interestingly enough, hardly no one had claims. Almost everyone had claims on corn. Almost no one had claims on soybeans, right? So soybeans, even though they were crazy short and really stressed early on, they really didn't. They were probably 25%, 30% off. So it depends on what what guarantee you elected, right? Because if you want 80%, you can guarantee 80% of your approved yield, but it also is more expensive, right? And most people at that time, that's kind of changed too, right? I think the average grower has probably gotten more aggressive on crop insurance just because our inputs are so high, right? I think that's what you had me here to talk about today. It was just the fact that, I think back 2 years ago, 2 years ago for growers was really scary. Yes, we had $6 corn, right? So 2 years ago at this time, you could have, if you looked at the December futures, we had $6 corn that you could sell corn for. And yet, if you looked at what we were spending for nitrogen 2 years ago, it was in excess of $1 per pound, right? Yeah. I mean, you could spend, without question, you could spend $250 on your crop nutrients for the year. Some folks were spending in excess of $350 an acre for crop nutrients, and that's a big number, right? And it takes a lot of bushels to offset that.
It was a lot. It was like the first time a lot of retailers ever owned over $1,000 ammonia themselves. I mean, that's what they had in it to get it to their facilities, and that was the first time I'd ever seen that.
Yeah, it was scary times. Yeah. And we had this big commodity price, but commodity prices, they ebb and flow, and you never really know. I mean, there's no guarantees that you're going to have that. And, at the end of the day, it ended up being fine. The cool thing is, for some of the meetings we've done recently, I've been talking about potassium and why they need to belly up to the trough on potassium, right? Because, P and K, I'm talking about phosphorus and potassium prices have been elevated the last couple of years. And yet today, if you do the metrics, and Scott helped me with this, right? If you do the metrics, 2 years ago, it took 58 bushel just to pay, 58 bushel of the corn you produced 2 years ago is what it took to pay for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. And that's with a pretty modest program. A year ago, it took 54 bushel, and last month it would have took 39 right now it would take about 40 bushel, right? So we're significantly less. So in some respects, we're in a better shape now than we were the previous 2 years. Now, that being said, crop protection has changed, right? The premixes of crop protection are probably a little higher. They've appreciated last year and then this year. One of the things that's changed that's going to be an advantage to growers is, some of the non-selective herbicides we use, like Liberty and Roundup, are significantly less, right, this year than what they have been. Seed is up. I know that's kind of a concern for growers, but in reality, seed hasn't gone up. It looks like seed is appreciated disproportionately, but it's because there was 2 years that seed really kind of lagged, right? Especially 2 years ago, the cost of seed really didn't go up much, and yet when you look at the value of seed to our productivity, there's no question that's probably added more bushels than any other single thing, right? I saw a satiric.
You got to talk about the 7 inches of rain thing. Did you see that?
I did, but I wasn't going to talk about
Okay,
that. I was
go ahead.
going to talk about Dr. Satirius' work out of Iowa State, and basically he's trying to, we recognize that we've had a lot of genetic gain, right? That it's probably somewhere in excess of 2 bushels per year is what we've gained. Well, how much of that is actually from the genetics, and what portion of that is from management, right? Increasing populations, increasing inputs, managing more intensely. And boy, he took on the size and the scope of this project that he took on was just unfathomable, right? They looked at corn hybrids for the last 40 years, right? Because the seed companies keep a lot of this germplasm in cold storage in perpetuity, right? Just for these, I'm not really sure
The history of all the seed that they brought to market, they've kept all those.
Exactly. All those hybrids are kept in cold storage. There's some supply of that kept over. And so what they did was they took hybrids over the last 40 years and it was 80 different hybrids. So they had 2 hybrids, an average of 2 hybrids from each year. And then they managed some of it like it was managed at the time it was released. So you think about,
Wow.
the 80s, I was a scout in the early 80s, and we were planting 19 to 20,000 plants per acre, right? Today we're at 34,000 plants, 34,000. And so what they did was they took modern hybrids and these historical hybrids, and they either managed them like they did the year they came out, or they managed them like we would today. And what they found was that it's about 86% of the gain came from genetics, and 14, 15%
Wow.
came from actual management
Wow.
practices. But they took so many metrics. I mean, I would not do justice. I'm not going to do justice to it, giving him a, kind of a blip on the screen here, but it was an
Can we find it somewhere?
Yeah, we could probably get
Just
you.
get a link? We can link
I
it?
could probably
Okay.
send
It'd
you
be
a
pretty
link.
neat.
Yeah,
But
let's
it's
get the link to that.
Yeah, it was just a really, really intensive. They took lots of metrics, trying to determine, what's the difference in biomass between corns 40 years ago and today, right? Because we know that they're yielding more, and we know that they take up more nutrition late in the season, right? Tony Vine did a lot of that work. But it's really a function of is the kernel size changing? Where is the yield coming from? And we know that it's actually bigger, heavier kernels is one of the largest metrics, right? And even that, everybody's like, oh, well, the test weight's increasing. No, we're not talking about the test weight. We're not talking about the density of a measure of grain. We're talking about the actual kernel size and weight itself has changed dramatically.
It would be interesting to see what those hybrids were 20, 30 years ago and how they would stack up. Well, the growers talk about they've lost their favorite hybrid that they used to plant because
Sure.
we've got new stuff and just to know that 86% of it is just the genetic gain.
Right.
That's we know it's not all of it, but to be that much is considerable.
Yeah. So most of the studies we've had in the past were typically partnered with like Pioneer, and so I wouldn't be able to probably send you a link to that. because obviously we're branded here. But this study was actually funded by Bayer Life Sciences. So yeah, I don't think there'd be a problem. And it's there's just so much information there to wade through, because I think they had 12. I think he said it had 12 PhD students working on this. That's how many
Wow.
metrics they were taking: above ground, below ground yield, just plant structure, ear height, kernel number. It was an unbelievable study.
So you talked about how many bushels per acre for the NPK and going down. It was at 58 bushels there a couple of years ago, and now it's 40 bushels kind of this year.
Yeah, roughly 40 bushels to pay for crop nutrients.
Yes, just for the
that's not seed. That doesn't pay for any crop protection products, right? And so it depends a lot too on how you manage the crop, right? So I'm one of those. I am an agronomist, right? So I tend to, when you think about nitrogen, there's the economic optimum N rate, and then there is the agronomic optimum N rate. Well, what's the difference? Well, the economic optimum N rate is where you get close to the top of the curve. And obviously, as you keep putting more on, you start reducing the return on investment. And when that line gets to where you're no longer increasing yield in a proportionate amount, then that would be the agronomic optimum N rate. When we think about that's the economic optimum N rate. When we think about the agronomic optimum N rate, we're saying, hey, how do we get the maximum bushels? Where is the top of the curve?
Regardless.
Yeah, regardless of whether you're making an investment or you're getting a return on your investment. Sorry, I'm a little foggy today, right?
That's right. We like it. We may have an advantage
Kind of
today.
refreshing.
Yeah, we might get him on one. Talk about other things. You talked about input costs. What about cash rent? How do you view cash rent? How do you see that affecting farmers and the other competition that you have for ground?
Yeah, well, I'm afraid that they might be listening to this, so I better not be too forthright. But
well, not your landlords, clearly.
No, actually, that probably keeps a lot of folks. That keeps a lot of folks awake, right? There's always this yin and yang. How do you decide what is fair to a landlord, and yet how do you protect yourself? Because you can get in more trouble with rent than probably any other single factor, because it's coming off of the It may come off of the gross, but it has a huge impact on the net, right? And so, I don't know how cash rents were set historically, because I think everybody backed into their rent a different way, right? Some folks, it was, they went from halves to thirds, or 60-40 to thirds, and then, landlords, because they're divided up, didn't want to get a bill in the spring. So it's like, well, okay, we'll just go to cash rent, or we'll go to a rent where it's based on, it may still be, your rent may still be based on production, but you're getting a smaller proportion. And I don't know what a fair number would be. To me, I'm thinking that probably if a grower is not charging landlords any input cost, a third is entirely too much, right? I don't know how you cash flow that. I really don't. So it probably should be based on, in full disclosure, if you said, okay, what should the average piece of ground cost? It probably is somewhere between 20 and 25% is what it really should be. Of course, we don't live in a perfect world. It's very competitive, and we have growers that are offering crazy cash rents, and those guys are oftentimes the first ones to get in trouble, right? Because your landlord rarely, they don't always need to see your rent appreciate, but they certainly don't ever like to see it go backward.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the thing that gets
That's
you in
human
trouble.
nature. I mean,
Yeah.
once you sell $6 corn, you really don't want to sell $4 corn.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I can tell you how I'd manage it is, I've kind of have these loose contracts like most farmers do with my landlords, and basically I have not changed my rent values very much over the last several years. What I do is I pay them a bonus based on the previous year. And that way I have a little bit of cushion in there in case I would have a really bad year. Because here's the deal, right? Not every drought year, Ryan, is going to be like 2012, right? If we had a drought year where only we didn't get rain, but the Corn Belt does, and the commodity prices don't reflect that. That was what was different about 2012. No one had a crop. The price escalated to this crazy number, and we all came out because our guarantees went up. right? But if you here in southern Indiana didn't get rain and you had a 100 bushel crop when everybody else is raising,
Normal yields.
yeah, normal yields, then you are absolutely screwed. And it's, those are the things that keep you awake at night.
Sure enough.
But here's the thing: you can't dwell on that, right? The old timers used to say the surest way to get a short crop is to plan for one. That's that is as true today as it ever was, right? And it seems really easy. We started out talking about input costs because that's the time of year it is, right? We're all paying for inputs, and if I were to put a number on crop protection, crop protection could be as cheap as $50 or $60 an acre for just herbicides, but we're not using just herbicides anymore, right? It's, by the way, those herbicides, that's a premix, and then it also requires adjuvants, and it also requires, oftentimes we put other components in there to make it to work, and you still have to get it applied.
Yeah.
And you're saying, oh, well, I'm self-applied. Okay, well, you take that sprayer, take that sprayer.
$400,000.
Yeah, take that $400,000, and then you divide it by the number of acres that you have, and you'll find real quick that it's not like there's no cost to self-application. In fact, I swear you could have it custom applied, probably cheaper, right? And
I think most people who own them, not most, but some, have made that comment. I could get it done cheaper by you, but I can control when I get it done by me, which is maybe an argument that's lost now with the logistics and the abilities and capabilities that we have. But I mean, it's legit. I mean, that's if you wanted to go spray on Sunday, a lot of days, maybe it does work.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
So how do you decide when to sell? I mean, so you're selling in advance before you've harvested it.
Have I got a sign on me somewhere that says, this is my weakness, this is my soft underbelly?
We got him down. We're going to kick him.
Chink. Yep, found it.
Jeepers. Well, just like most growers,
Let's
right?
do this. Let's say, how does a grower decide when to sell?
Yeah, good question. You really need help, right?
Yeah.
I think that most of them, I've often heard, experts on the subject say, oh, well, you need to know what your cost of inputs are. And if you can make money at a certain price, well, you need to start selling. That's okay. Well, I also have competition, right? And just because I took a price that was, I'm making the case that that's a little bit naive, right? Can I make money at $5 corn? And can I make money at $10 soybeans? Probably. But that doesn't mean I don't want $6 corn and I don't want $12 soybeans, because if somebody else is getting that, then I'm in competition with them for rent and everything else, right? So I think that's a little naive to make those kind of comments. But you do often need to know what your cost of production is, and you need to put realistic figures in. And, personally, I subscribe to a couple different companies that help you market grain. And then my local elevator, I've got a person there that I trust pretty well. They're kind of a pessimist, right? And I think oftentimes what growers need is you need to have somebody who's an optimist, somebody that's really creative, is constantly looking at options and different vehicles to help make you more money, be more aggressive about selling. But you also need to have that person that's been there and done that and says, you know what? Sometimes you just need to make a cash sale because you can make money at that number.
Yeah.
Right? You need to have both of those people in your court. If you listen to one or the other, you're probably going to be disappointed.
Interesting.
Sounds wise.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I've gotten there. Like most farmers, I'm sitting on corn. The ones that got the real double whammy this
Are you
year.
waiting for the run?
Yeah.
He just rubbed his head again.
Yeah.
Another tail.
I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's out of aces.
Yeah. So you never want to follow me when it comes to anything to do with marketing, right? So I carried some corn into this year. It was more about taxes than it really was around speculating the price was going to go up. But do you remember this fall? They were talking about how hurt all the Midwest was, right? The Western Corn Belt.
Choked it all the way down to 277 bushel acres or what?
Oh yeah. Northern Illinois is hurt. Iowa, parts of Iowa are hurt. Nebraska's just burned up, and yet we still raised a record crop, right? Well, the guys that really got the double whammy were the ones that went and bought that built a bunch of storage this last year. And when you build new storage, it's highly irregular for somebody that just built a bunch of storage not to want to put corn in it, right?
Right.
And,
I'm going to put corn in it. If I built that bin.
you built that bin, you're going to put corn in it. And man, that's just kind of the kiss of death there too.
We talk about that a lot. Is that well, what's your growth plan? Well, I think we need more storage. Okay, but if the market's telling you to sell, are we going to keep it full?
Yeah.
No, I would hope that would be our answer.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that unfortunately there's still entirely too much emotion takes place, and of course, cash flow is another thing, right? I mean, I'm a little concerned because we've got all this, we got a record crop on farm, and if the market would start to respond and try to hurt these folks that have, all these funds that have taken short positions that are kind of keeping it beat down, if it ever would go to respond, I'm afraid that myself included, we'll all rush to get something sold, and that will immediately
lock it down again.
That'll lock it down again, right? Put it in a, in a bearish position. So yeah, I think we may be here for a while, but I would suspect, right? I'm not a grains guru. I know nothing about marketing, but just as an agronomist and, thinking about traditionally how this works, I think we'd be pretty naive to believe that this gradient between corn and soybeans that we have right now isn't going to narrow up. Either soybeans are going to have to come down, which I don't think is likely to happen because I'm not saying it couldn't, but
right, sure.
But it seems more unlikely because we're shorter on soybeans. But it's going to be, I think there'll be an attempt to buy corn acres for next year, right? If you're somebody that is reliant on corn to do your business, then there sometimes is an advantage when most people never really contract all their crop, right? So you might call it like a loss leader. It's like charging $1 for a jug of milk to get you into the store. Sometimes I believe that integrators will bid up in the spring to ensure that they get more corn acres, and then that will allow them to take advantage of that down the road. I think there's a fair amount of that goes on.
Interesting.
So without getting too into names and brands and all of that stuff, farmers are always inundated with the opportunity for the next technology. I'm talking about the wired stuff, not necessarily the new hybrids, but something with wires on it makes your tractor do better or makes your planter do better. And everything comes with a bushel increase. I had customers tell me for years when I was selling, if I bought everything that you told me had a 2 bushel increase on it, I'd make 800 bushel the acre. But a lot of times, if you don't know until you try it. You see all this data that says this is good. So from a technology standpoint, we know what you need. You got to have nutrients. You got to have weed control. You got to have some seed out there. Some of those things you're going to buy. What do you rely on from a technology standpoint that says even though input costs are high, commodity prices are low, I couldn't do without this technology because I know it helps my farm?
Man, that's a really good question. Were you trying to lead me there, Ryan?
Not necessarily. I mean, I would think that it would be things like making sure you get your seed planted correctly. Obviously, I mean, there's a lot of technology in that people look at it and go, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's not like heated seats in a pickup truck. It looks like an option,
sure,
but there's a return on it.
Yeah. So, we went through a period where almost any kind of spatial technology had a really high adoption, and a lot of folks are utilizing that to make decisions. But most people are, it's color pictures and it looks really nice, but I'm not convinced that they use it to make decisions for the next year or maybe even in the same year, right? I know that climate when I first adopted that technology, and I could really kind of do an analysis of some of these farms, right, and cut out the bad spots and cut out all the shading from trees, and actually be more objective about how I evaluated hybrids. It was game changing for me, right? And then the next thing that shows up is wet spots in the field, how much influence there is from the trees, right? I mean, I haven't gotten plumb carried away, but I can tell you that when you see how big the impact is of shading from trees and competition to the crop, it makes you want to go whack all your fence rows and all of your field edges, right? It makes you want to trim those back because it has just a profound impact on probably not just the outside 6 rows where you don't raise anything, or the outside 12 rows where you raise half a crop, but even as far as 2 planter widths, even at 32 rows, there is still probably some impact from the border effect from fields. So that to me has made a big difference. I don't have a drone for application, but I have employed drones for application, which Premier does that too. That's a technology that's a game changer, right? It allows you to make precision applications aerially on small irregular shaped patches, and it's something that at times I wish I had one, or I wish I had access to just go in and make spot sprays. I would love to just go in and be able to applicate voids and riser pipes, where you have terraces, that sort of thing, because those voids are always where your perennials and your really bad weed problems start, is around those voids.
Yeah, so that's where the seed's produced.
Yeah, it'd really be nice to, and yet you can't hardly hire somebody to just come in and do those types of applications, right?
No, it'd be a good spot for drones. Go in there and just spray those 1/3 of an acre or 6 acres of burr cucumber or all those types of applications.
Absolutely. But there is, there's a plethora of technology. I do believe that maybe we've maxed out this planter thing, right? And I don't want to make fun of precision planting, but that's probably what you were alluding to earlier.
Well, and I think you said it. You objectively look at a field and say, these are my yielding areas, and these are the areas that for some outside reason, whether they're edges or they're wet spots or there's a different soil type, sand or whatever, I would think at least the ability to manage your inputs across those through a prescription would be, we do it with fertilizer. And you talk about the pretty maps and the pretty pictures that come from a yield map. We ought to do something with them.
Oh, absolutely.
And having the technology to be able to do that is at least a step in that direction.
Yeah.
So
spatial technology, that as soon as you started down that path, it dawned on me that for most people, they think that the promise of spatial technology is to identify the bad spots and make them better with some kind of application. And yet that's really not the promise of spatial technology. It's kind of worked that way on lime, right? We can go in, take variable rate sampling, and then make lime applications. And that is probably
lime's the quickest payoff.
Yeah, that's probably the most successful single, when we think about spatial technology and the promise of spatial technology, that's probably the best success story. But when it comes to just jacking up crops in the middle of the field, what is probably not well recognized is that the places that have the best crop actually are the places that respond to the most inputs, right? And so if you have a place that is not responding, if you've got a bad place in the field, that's not where you spend your resources. You actually spend your resources on those better spots. So if you got a field that is in terrible shape, I'm not saying you abandon it, but that's not really the value of spatial technology. The value of spatial technology is to find those fields that do have lots of yield potential and jack them up even farther.
Yeah, and adjust your spend elsewhere.
Absolutely, right? Last 2 years we've talked a lot about fungicide and trying to control tar spot. Well, if you got a field that's been struggling all year for whatever reason, too hot, too dry, too cold, too whatever, is that really the place where you're likely to see the biggest return on investment, or the field that's absolutely been rocking and rolling, right? It's the field that's been rocking and rolling is probably going to give you the much larger return on investment, and that's where you should spend your first dollar. So sometimes that's a little counterintuitive for growers.
Yeah, it would be.
Yep.
Ryan, that's about all I have.
Yeah,
do you have anything else?
Nope. I think that was good. I appreciate it. That's what we were asked about. I mean, people want to know.
It's my pleasure.
We'll send you to Walgreens and get you some medicines, and you'll be feeling better.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that's another episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. If you like what you have been watching and listening to, please like and subscribe on YouTube or the other platforms. And Ryan, Glenn,
thanks.
Have a good day.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.